This is going to be somewhat of an easier talk. I've got some stories to share. This is about my time at GitLab, leading the data team there, and yeah, I think you'll walk away hopefully with some lessons, and we'll just dive right in. My name is Taylor Murphy. I'm currently at Meltano as the head of product and data. Previously, I was at GitLab. I was a data engineer there, data team lead, manager, and then also a staff data engineer as well. I was there for about 3 years before we spun Meltano out. This talk is about lessons that I learned at GitLab, from GitLab, that I think are valuable regardless of the culture that you're in. And I specifically say regardless of the culture because GitLab, if you don't know much about it, it has a very strong culture. Especially around the time that I was joining, they were becoming a much bigger company and were well known for their culture in particular. And that's one of the reasons why I joined. That's why a lot of people joined GitLab. So the culture of GitLab is really strong. This is a image that they used to have in their handbook. I don't think they quite use it anymore, but it's helpful for describing the core values of the company. And so the values spell credit, collaboration, results, efficiency, diversity, inclusion, iteration, and transparency. And these kind of build up into this pyramid that all leads towards results, and they have little blurbs there that you can read. All of this leads to a very unique culture driven a lot by the CEO. One thing about GitLab that a lot of people know is that we were extremely public about everything. We had a public handbook that you can go read, and many folks probably in the data space have seen parts of the data team handbook. All of our merge requests, for the most part, are open and public, and you can go see changes that we're proposing, the conversations that we're having. And then even more crazy is meetings. Still to this day, a lot of them are live streamed on YouTube. You can go watch them. There's conversations with the CEO. I remember one, he was talking to somebody on Hacker News and said, hey, let's hop on a live stream. And they talked about something from a Hacker News thread. So just very public, very open, and very, very transparent, which was always exciting for me. Another unique aspect of the GitLab culture is that every employee knows how to open an issue, make a merge request, and edit YAML and Markdown. This enables you to do some really interesting things, like have everything in version control. But it's something that I haven't seen many places elsewhere, and it takes some time, like training, to kind of unwind your brain and just like, oh, like everybody can make a merge request. No, not everybody can. At GitLab, everybody could, and that did enable some cool things. Another more fun facts about the culture. Pre-COVID, I'm pretty sure it was the largest all-remote company. We were known for that, hiring globally, very asynchronous first culture. And this culture was reinforced by the CEO and the executives quite a bit. So that's GitLab's culture generally. This talk is going to be kind of about 3 key lessons. Simple to say, leadership and strategy matter, transparency is powerful, people and your tools matter. Like I said, these are simple lessons, and I'm kind of a big believer in like doing the simple things well, repeatedly, and practicing them. And I would say that each of these are essential to have in any part of a culture, but they're not sufficient. They're not all the elements of a company culture that you would want to have. Okay, so I need to set the stage a little bit. So I joined GitLab in 2018, and I am sad to report that was 5 years ago. That's half a decade. Yeah, if you haven't done the math, it makes me sad. 2018 facts. You would have been at Data EngConf, not Data Council. Yes, back in the good old days. DBT was in version 0.9.1. We were active users of DBT at that stage. Very fun, very wild. Snowflake was only valued at a measly $1.5 billion, and our boy Rootin' Tootin' Slootman was not CEO yet. We still had Bob Muglia there. And then generally the data startup landscape was just very different. 2018 facts about GitLab. They just raised a Series C, I think, for like $20 million, which seems like a small Series C now. About 200 people when I joined, and then, like I said, it was all remote. In 2021, when we spun out Meltano, by that time they had 6x the headcount at least to 1,200, 1,500, I think. The data team was still less than 10 people. We were a very small data team for the size of the company and the work that we were doing. And we would IPO in late 2021, and I was part of the team that kind of built all the metrics and stuff for that. Okay, so diving in, we're talking about why leadership and strategy matters. This is a chart that you can find in the handbook today. I actually just screenshotted it. That kind of gives you an overview of the hierarchy of an organization. I find this to be very useful because it shows you, okay, what are the different levels for people within an organization? What's their kind of scope of impact? What do they think about? And then what are they expected to do? And you can probably find yourself on there somewhere if you're a director, CEO or an intermediate, whatever. And it's a nice model to think about how you affect change in an organization. By the way, all these things are linked. If you go to meltano.com /data-council-2023, you'll find the links and you can directly go to that stuff. So I'm showing this because when I was hired, I was actually hired as a data engineer, just straight up data engineer. I was reporting to the senior director of data and analytics, who we reported up into the CFO and finance. Very soon after I joined, I didn't know this when I joined, he left the company and I was directly reporting to the CFO, which is not a fun place to be. It's not the right level of abstraction. And you can kind of see this gap that existed. Very quickly, I became the manager of the team because I had managed teams previously, and I was able to hire a data engineer and a data analyst. But what I want you to notice from this hierarchy is there's a big gap, and this director gap was a problem. It would become a problem as we were scaling. For me in particular, for the data team, I think it caused some interesting challenges. And then also, I think reporting into finance was a problem. Not saying that data teams shouldn't report into finance, but it creates interesting challenges. This combination of not kind of having director level leadership, particularly in 2018, reporting into finance, led to having kind of a lack of data leadership across the organization. Within finance, we were doing well, but having that influence across the organization, just a lack of power. I didn't have that influence. I could manage my team and have some influence across other teams. I just didn't have much power in the organization. It also led to a lack of situational awareness. When you're not in the room where some of these conversations are happening, even for a very transparent company like GitLab, you just aren't aware of certain things that are happening. You can only consume so much information. And this led to us really underserving product, marketing, sales, customer success, engineering. Literally everybody but finance was unhappy with our output. Maybe you're in a similar situation. I mean, I think the data needs of an organization always kind of outstrip capabilities. So I want to share story time. I want to share two quick stories kind of about strategy without leadership and then leadership without strategy. And this kind of leads to the, strategy and leadership are important. So some strategy, no leadership. If you look in the handbook today, you'll see this image on the data team handbook of these are all the data program teams. And I think there's 10, 11 of them there. And there's also this nice image of there's a central data team, and then there's all these hubs and spokes. And in the handbook, it looks really nice. It looks like we planned this out, and it's well structured. That wasn't the case. What really happened was data was doing the best that we could, and then you see that somebody's getting onboarded, and their title's marketing analyst. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Let's set up a coffee chat with this person and see what's going on. Marketing hired their own analyst and didn't necessarily consult us, didn't necessarily have to, but it would have been nice. I'm picking on marketing here. So the direct story is that they wanted to implement Pendo. Pendo's a product analytics tool. Maybe they call themselves a platform now. I don't know 100% what they do. We never actually implemented it, but marketing loved it. Problems that we had though, it's for them it solved their problems. The marketing leader had previously used it before, and they were just ready to go. They knew what they were doing, and they were wanting to put this in place. The data team, we come in and we're like, wait, this is not open source. It's unclear how we're going to get the data out of this system, what's generating it, what additional reporting you want from it. And just generally, we weren't kind of consulted or informed in this decision. And we started to push back pretty hard on this. We pushed for Snowplow, the data analyst on my team. She'd used it previously and was like, look, you don't need Pendo. This is going to be more aligned with our values. It's open source. Here's what we can do for it. And in the end, we won, but I don't know if still to this day if it was 100% the right decision. I think we likely overpromised as a small data team. The marketing team knew what they were trying to do, and we had kind of our own internal strategy of like, this is a open source product, and we want to bring everything into the data warehouse. And I think potentially would better visibility across the organization have helped us and potentially led to a different outcome? Maybe. It's hard to say, but when you're coming into a meeting with some executives and the data team, not having anybody like at the director level that's able to advocate for data can be a challenge. And then also, like, I'm just not sure we made a ton of friends from that. In the end, we implemented Snowplow, and we were able to deliver on some of our promises, but I think it left the marketing team somewhat frustrated. Many lessons from this one. Hunger for data doesn't stop at your team's capabilities. People want data, and just because you're telling them no, they're going to try and go figure it out somewhere else. So something to be aware of. Have representation at the director level or above. Like, you need some power across the org, and then just don't report into finance. The second mini story is strong leadership, but minimal strategy. So this is actually the original story of Meltano. Back then, it was called a BizOps project. Meltano at the time was a very CEO-driven project. It was the basic idea was, hey, everything that we're doing for software development teams, let's do for data teams. One platform, work like software developers. This will be great. So when I joined, BizOps was kind of starting to get kicked off. We actually shared a repo for a little while. They had maybe 5 or 6 developers, I think, on the BizOps project that would become Meltano. And in August, you can see the date here, August 1st, we announced that, hey, data teams, we're working on a tool just for you. Looking back on it, though, we were, for the data team in particular, too focused inward on our own tooling. Today, Meltano is, of course, a great tool, fantastic. Would love to talk to you about it. But for us at the time, I didn't have like a very clear strategy about like exactly what we were trying to do and how this fit into our overall strategy for the company. It was fun, don't get me wrong, thinking about our tooling, how can we version control everything, how can we build this awesome tool, but it was costing us time in our relationships with the rest of the organization and leading us to underserve more. So I say here there was strong leadership from the CEO. This is something he wanted, something we were excited about, but our lack of a data strategy led to, again, I think, suboptimal outcomes. That's just what I said, yes. So many lessons from this. I think you just have to know what you're trying to do. I just came from Abhi's talk about metric trees, which is like, oh man, I wish I had something like that back then to really think about and anchor all the efforts that we're trying to do as a data team to these metrics and these outcomes. And then this is saying the same thing twice. You have to focus, and you just have to know what to say no to, because focusing is how you're going to be able to get a lot done very quickly. So leadership and strategy matter. I think it helps you have more context and influence, and folks that have talked to me in the past know that I like to talk about like power within an organization, and I think acknowledging that power exists and power structures exist within an org is helpful. And having somebody with a little bit of power is always helpful for you as a data team. The strategy, it helps you know what to focus on, and when you know how to focus, it's just going to help you be more efficient. So leadership and strategy matter. Second point, transparency is powerful. This is my favorite one. So sharing this slide again, transparency was always the value of GitLab that brought me to the company, and something that I've pushed on and will continue to push on for the rest of my career. As a reminder, we had a public handbook, public merge requests, public live streams. I think we were the first company to publicly live stream the listing on the New York Stock Exchange. Just any excuse to be public about things absolutely was taken advantage of. And for me, transparency does 3 really important things. I think it solves a lot of problems, and I'll talk about that. I think it distributes power, which is why I'm a big fan of it. I think it brings more people in. And I think just generally it's very efficient. So how does transparency solve problems? Well, it answers a lot of questions. So if you had a question of what was the definition of this metric, very easy answer. It's in the handbook. We've documented it. We had a handbook first culture. If you didn't know the answer, you need to go put it in the handbook immediately. And that was the case for everything. We would just constantly be sending links to each other of here's the definition. Go find it. If you had a question, what happened in that meeting? There was always an agenda, and 99% of the time it was either recorded or it was live streamed. So you would get a Google Drive link or a YouTube link. What's our policy on X? It's in the handbook. This just was awesome. It just solved a lot of problems. One example that I have here, so these are screenshots from a merge request that I made to clarify the language around gross and net retention. And so you can see on the right that there's the diff showing what I'm adding, what I'm deleting here, and then there's a conversation between me and the CFO trying to get approval. Here he's saying, no, I don't think you did this right, and then it's cut off, but I'm saying actually I did do it right, and here's my spreadsheet. But the nice thing about this is the merge request would be approved by the stakeholders, and then it would get merged, and then you have that full history of what changed, what happened, and how things are iterating. And we would generate tons of merge requests as we were iterating on our metric definitions, on our DBT models. It would all flow into the handbook. Transparency distributes power. There is always this extreme visibility on policy and definition changes. Anytime a company policy changed, there was going to be a merge request, there was going to be an open discussion about it, usually async. Sometimes we would have like a sync meeting on that. And there's just the visibility both internally and externally around what was happening. We had very visible roadmaps and backlogs, both at the company level, but also on the data team. We had our own issue tracker. I had my roadmap boards of what we were working on, our milestones, all that fun stuff. And it generally made priority conversations easier. Not entirely easy, but easier. And so when people come to you saying like, hey, I need an answer to this question, and say, okay, look, this is what I'm working on. Help me figure out how to prioritize this better against all of these other priorities that I have. It just made those conversations easier to bring that visibility into the conversation. And another one is if you could see the code, if you can see the text, you can make a proposal, you can make a change. My very favorite example of that is this merge request that the inimitable Emily Sherrio made to update our parental leave policy from 12 weeks to 16 weeks. So the actual diff for this, if you were to click changes, it's just one character going from a 2 to a 6. This merge request itself was, had lots of information. Because it scrolled for a while, the business case for it, there was internal discussion, there was discussion on the merge request itself, and eventually it was merged. And I was able to take advantage of an additional 4 weeks of parental leave when I had my second child. It distributes power. It's just really cool that anybody can make these proposals. A silly example that I don't have a picture of is a sales guy came into our company, proposed that all salespeople get $600 phones paid for by the company. That was immediately closed by the CFO, saying, no, we're not doing that. Transparency is efficient. When you're transparent, I think you really invite people into the process. It definitely increases collaboration. By leaning into that value, you just make it more visible. And that's why we love open source too, is it's just visible, it brings people in. It's easier to make changes. I think diffs are lovely to look at and see what's going to happen, and I like diffs for a lot of things. And it does enable this asynchronous communication when you're really committed to being transparent. That encourages or maybe forces you to have specific habits around documentation and recording what's being said and discussed. But it also enables you to not be blocked by others. So how did this manifest particularly within the data team? Basically, I just want to version control all the things. If I'm touching it, interacting with it, it needs to be version controlled, and I want every change to flow via a pull request or merge request if you're at GitLab. What this meant for us was that we had our GitLab data team repo. It's at gitlab.com/gitlab-data/analytics. You can see we have, this was recent, so not all these obviously I touched, but like almost 34,000 commits, 10 gigabytes of data. I don't know what's actually in there. But everything, until recently, you could see most of the issues, most of the merge requests, but all the code was public and in this single repository. And so it was very cool to be able to point people to say, hey, we're changing a metric. Here's the DBT code that's changing, and this is the extract and load code that's driving it. And it allowed us actually to scale beyond our means, because people from the outside of our team could actually help and make changes. Of course, the data team handbook. We had our SQL style guide, our Python style guide, DBT style guide in there, documentation about how we use Snowflake, Permafrost, all these different tools. And something that I'm very proud of, still will likely reference for the rest of my career. We copied a lot of it when we spun out Meltano and have driven our own handbook. And of course, all of our policies and everything were in there. It also influenced our tool choice. So this is the old Meltano logo that we used to have. But we use Looker because they had Git integration. DBT, of course, because you could put it in Git in a file system. We had an internal tool called Postgres Pipeline, which we used to migrate our data from Postgres. Permafrost was a tool that was originally with Meltano that we spun out for managing permissions on Snowflake. And then, of course, we had CI, where we were doing like zero-copy clones and all this really fun stuff to run DBT and do all these tests before some of the newer features of DBT came out. I think the only thing we didn't version control was the actual data itself, but I think there's some vendors out there like LakeFS that'll help you do that if you need. Okay, one more story. So we were customers of Looker, pretty happy with it generally. And because we were a very transparent company, there was a lot of curiosity about how Looker worked from the Meltano team in particular. And so being the GitLab and the company that we are, I'd hop on live streams with them, or we'd record them and then upload them to YouTube later. And there's lots of videos of me and other people of my team like walking them through the Looker interface. Well, how does this work? How does LookML work? What's a measure? What's a dimension? What happens when you do X, Y, and Z? And evidently, Looker saw a lot of those videos and started telling us that we needed to stop that we were trying to reverse engineer their product. What we didn't know at the time was that they were being acquired by Google. And we had 24 hours notice before they shut down our Looker instance. We were using Looker for all of our reporting in the company. We had like a special license where everybody would have viewer access and could see all these reports. And like Monday, I get a notification, hey, they're going to turn it off at like 11 a.m. tomorrow. It was like, oh, okay, what do we do? So because of like the tool choices that we had and that the fact that we used the crap out of DBT, we were actually able to screenshot, move all our repositories, and basically take a snapshot in time of everything that was in Looker before they shut it down. And pretty quickly, like, spin up essentially Redash for a little bit, and then go on another journey to find a tool. We wound up using Periscope Data, which is now part of Sisense. They had a nice version control integration as well. That was pretty important to us. I attribute that to like this value of transparency, where because everything was version controlled, because we wanted it to be visible, we were actually able to respond to this crisis very quickly and manage it in a way that, while disruptive and an interesting war story, we were able to move on and kind of recovered quite nicely. But definitely traumatic for everyone on the team for a bit. Awesome. So transparency is powerful, solves problems, distributes power, is efficient, and I think the Looker story kind of encaptures that nicely. Oh, you can see me trying to use Markdown, and it didn't automatically make 2s and 3s. So kind of mini lessons from this. Commitment to transparency definitely requires discipline, but it is really valuable. One interesting lesson, having spun out Meltano and trying to apply a lot of these principles, is you find out where it's easy to do something in a larger organization versus a smaller organization. And it's led to interesting conversations internally on how we apply the GitLab values and convert them to kind of Meltano values. Transparency does force conversations and share power in, I think, a really useful way, and brings visibility to problems, especially things that executives care about. And that's something that I try to bring to how I run the data team at Meltano. And just acknowledging, even with this transparency, that while I could force conversations between certain people, I still didn't have that director level of leadership until later in my tenure there. And so these power structures still exist. And while there's maybe a merge request sitting there are going to be conversations that happen that you can't see. And strategy and leadership and having people that can be in the rooms still matters. All right, so that's 2 lessons. Leadership and strategy matter, and transparency is powerful. My last one is probably the least controversial one. People and tools matter. So this is probably the best thing I did as a manager, was hire awesome people on my team. So Emily Cherio, many of you maybe know, she's the data analyst on my team, and then Thomas LaPiana as the data engineer. And for almost a year, maybe 9 months, it was just the 3 of us as like the trio of data team. And we really punched above our weight. I think They were very aligned with the values of the company, very skilled professionals, and I'm still very much in touch with them today. Very proud of those two hires. But what does it mean to hire great people? One, I think you just need people that obviously can do the job. Like if you don't know SQL, if you don't know Python, that's going to be a problem. So that's kind of the minimum. Things that I look for, you need to be able to talk to other people. I think a lot of data, we get wrapped up in the tools and the code that we're writing. So much of it is talking to other people and encoding knowledge into computer systems. That's why I love data. It's like a representation of reality, a representation of truth. And you need people on your team that can talk and pull out that information and actually encode it. Other important parts or dimensions of hiring great people, they really need to match the stage of the company that you're in. I've heard lots of stories of hiring somebody from larger organizations into smaller organizations, and there just isn't that fit where maybe this person isn't used to the pace, or vice versa. Maybe somebody is high energy and wants to get a lot done and they get very frustrated by bureaucracy. You have to figure out how to kind of match their energy to your stage as a company and be honest about like the type of person that you need. And I always look for people that are just eager and want to learn and grow. Yes, they have the skills, but they're not satisfied with being static where they are. I want them to have that growth mindset and just curious, always curious about what they're trying to do and what they're trying to learn. And hiring great people is I think, very important because people reinforce the culture, I think, in every moment. Maybe this feels obvious to say, but like culture is kind of a emergent property of the patterns and behaviors of people. And if you don't have good people, you're not going to be able to keep the culture alive and reinforcement. And this one, I don't know if folks agree with, but I genuinely believe that tools reinforce your people every time they're used. Now, I'm not saying if you use Tableau over Lightdash or something like that your culture is going to drastically change. But I think there are elements of using a tool that reinforce the value systems of the people on your team. So I have one more story that kind of exemplifies this, I think. Maybe this is common, figuring out monthly recurring revenue in an organization. So we had, as you do, disparate systems doing their own thing. Engineering has a customers database that defines like license keys. Salesforce sales team had their account hierarchy, how everything rolls up, and in Zora we had subscription and SKU data over time, and the finance team was managing that. And this, when you have multiple systems, disparate sets of information, you're trying to figure out a shared source of truth. That's where a data team, I think, shines. Sure, you can throw a data team at analyzing problems within one system, but it's integrating data together that is really where data teams are powerful. So us and the data team here, our little trio, started lots of conversations with folks on these teams about how do these systems work. Of course, you pull all the data into the warehouse, and we started, of course, going back and forth with these folks via DBT, modeling what we were seeing, what they were understanding their systems to operate. And the cool thing from this, I actually don't know how common this is, but the fun thing about Zora subscriptions, as it turned out, these were actually a DAG through time. So we had multiple customers who had subscriptions, different teams buying GitLab. They're like, oh, the account team wanted to actually consolidate this into one team. And then for whatever reason, maybe another team needed to buy it or they needed to split them back out. And you could trace over time how these subscriptions were linking up. And then you had to make all these decisions about, well, if they don't pay for 1 month and then they reactivate, is that churn? You just have all these interesting conversations. But the DAG concept was very cool. And from this project, and there are many like it, there were a lot of very positive outcomes. We helped the sales team to standardize kind of their Salesforce account hierarchy. We had DBT tests that would flag like, hey, you have an account here that doesn't have an ultimate parent, and they could go fix that. Standardized how Zora subscriptions were linked. We identified that they were a DAG, and we had tests to ensure data integrity that they actually were a DAG when they came into the warehouse. We identified a few bad database practices in the customer's DB, like no primary keys, maybe you're overwriting data a little bit too much, like maybe we just kind of do some appending there, open some issues around that. I actually don't know if they solved all of that, but we at least identified the issues. Of course, there were multiple metric updates and definitions around this. I showed you the image of the merge request earlier. In figuring out all of the intricacies of these different systems, we had incountable merge request updates of like, okay, hey, retention now needs to be defined by this because we had like different caveats because of weirdness in the data. And then there's, of course, cleaning up all of the bad data as you do as part of a data team. But the outcome of this this looks complicated. It's not too complicated. But we had kind of built this system where each of the teams were able to use tools to solve their own problems. So you have the data team at the bottom. We were creating issues in GitLab and using GitLab to orchestrate the work. The data was flowing into the warehouse. We were using dbt. We generated some dashboards in Periscope that the sales team, the finance team would go to, and that would actually kind of be their to-do list of like, oh, we've got some subscriptions that need linking. They would go back into Zora, make their own tickets to figure it out. And if there were ever any questions about what the definition of a metric was or what the process was, it was all in the handbook. And it created this nice flow. And this didn't come whole cloth. This wasn't something like a big waterfall project. This was built up over time with the goal of better understanding MRR, ARR, retention, all those important numbers that you need to care about as a business. So I highlight that story because it's one that I'm proud of. It's something that I think drove a lot of value for the company, and I think we did it in a way that really lived the values of the company. I had great people on my team that were able to deliver good results. We did it iteratively. We did it with transparency. We did it in collaboration with the rest of the teams that we were working with. And I think we were fairly efficient about it because the tools that we chose. And the tools that we chose, I think, did support our values here. Big fan of dbt, but a lot of the stuff was in YAML files and Markdown. Of course, everybody used GitLab at GitLab. That's where all our issues were, all of our merge requests. And then folks used Periscope as our BI tool. And I think it's simple to say. Of course, people matter. They do reinforce your culture. And we love to talk about tools, especially at a conference like this. But I do think they matter, and the combination of really good people and great tools can solve some real problems for companies and for organizations. So those are my 3 lessons. Leadership and strategy matter. Transparency is powerful. People and tools matter. I want you to take these lessons and to really just think about how they apply for your organization and your team culture in particular. No matter the values of the company, I think you can take these and think about both in the micro on your team, how they apply, but also within the organization. You can identify, are we missing some leadership at a data level? Maybe you're a data team lead, but if you're directly reporting to an executive and there's other directors and VPs in the organization, recognize that gap exists. How are you going to handle it? What's your strategy around it? Is there something that you can do to be more transparent in the organization? I was at Katie Bauer's talk about the kind of weekly business reviews. That's a great way to bring transparency to the organization. Is there something you can do yourself to do that? But how can you influence the culture more broadly? And so just keep them in mind when you're facing problems. They won't, like I said, they are simple to say, but they're not sufficient for solving all your problems. But I think they are core elements that no matter where I work and no matter who I talk to, these are things that I will advocate for in your team and in your organizations. So with that, thank you very much. Like I said, meltano.com/data-cancel-2023. There are some links there. Thank you again to Maggie for helping me with this talk. And thank you all for your time and attention. Really appreciate it.